Today is our second webinar about the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program, or the ITEP funding opportunity. And today's webinar is hosted by the Active Transportation Alliance and the Illinois Public Health Institute in partnership with the Illinois Department of Transportation. So again, this is the second webinar in our three-part webinar series, and our focus is helping applicants across the state develop successful ITEP proposals for walking, biking, and trail projects. And today we'll be walking you through the ITEP application, and then we'll be reviewing the scoring criteria. So towards the end, we'll also have time for Q&A with IDOT staff. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So we are recording this webinar, and it will be posted to activetrans.org/ITEP. We'll also include a link to the slides, so you can find all of that there. If you have questions about your project or just questions that come up during the presentation, please add them to the Q&A box. And if you can, please add them to the Q&A box, not the chat box, because we'll focus on the Q&A box towards the end of the webinar when we bring in IDOT for the Q&A. And if you need closed captioning, it is available in the Zoom menu bar. So we're our organization, the Active Transportation Alliance. We're a nonprofit. Our mission is to advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. Our focus is the Chicagoland region, but we do serve the entire state. And my name is Maggie Sherwinski. I'm the Director of Community Building and Leadership, and my colleague with me, who is co-presenting today, is Jim Merrill, the Managing Director of Advocacy. And a little background, this webinar series is thanks to a program called the iSpan program. It's the Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program. It's a partnership with the Illinois Public Health Institute, and it's funded by the CDC. And then the focus today is really physical activity. So that's why we're focused on the walking, biking, and trail categories of the ITEP grant. And if you were at our last webinar, that was in July, and it was an overview of the ITEP grant. We talked about which types of projects are eligible for funding, as well as best practices for your application. And that recording and the slides are at that website, activetrans.org/ITEP. Today is part 2 of the series, and then part 3 will be in September. It's September 11th, and that will be focused primarily on Q&A with IDOT staff. And I forgot to mention, so we do have John and Yulita from IDOT here today for the Q&A, and we also have IPHI staff, Kira and Sarah, who are managing the chat and can help with any technical issues that might come up. And Kira will be adding links to the chat as we mention them throughout the presentation. So today we're going to start with a very brief overview about ITEP, and then we'll dig into the scoring criteria that you should be thinking about this year, and then we'll walk you through the entire application, and then we'll save hopefully the second half of the webinar for Q&A with IDOT, and make sure to use that Q&A box in the Zoom menu bar. So with that, I will pass it over to Jim to talk about.
All right. Thank you, Maggie, and good morning again, everyone. Happy to be here with you. So a quick overview of ITEP. Hopefully this is a review, but we want to make sure we all have kind of a shared understanding before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the application process. So the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program, or ITEP, is a federally and state-funded program administered by the Illinois Department of Transportation, or IDOT. Significant source of funding for walking, biking, and shared multi-use path projects in our state. The funding cycle is every 2 years, so even numbered calendar years, such as the one that we're in. The application submittal period began August 1st, and it goes through the end of next month, September 30th, 2024. And there's $140 million available in federal and state funding. Go to the next slide. So what's new this year? a couple of things. There's updated ITEP guidelines. There's also updated IDOT and GATA pre-award documentation requirements. And to help understand all that stuff, there are a couple of great existing resources. So the IDOT ITEP website, you can find those ITEP guidelines, the application portal, and other resources. And the Active Trans ITEP resource page, you can find recordings from this and previous webinars in the series, answers to frequently asked questions, and other relevant documents. So that's activetrans.org/ITEP. Lots of goodies there. Definitely recommend you checking it out. And your IDOT contacts. So when you have more specific detailed questions about your project, we definitely recommend reaching out directly to your IDOT district coordinator, a good relationship to have. So here's the contact information by district. You can see to the right there. You can also reach out to John and Yulita through the email addresses on the left, the ITEP, the dot.itep@illinois.gov. And finally, this is also information you can find on the activetrans.org/ITEP website if you need to reference this during the webinar, which I do. There's a lot of alphabet soup. So a few acronyms are going to come up. ITEP and IDOT, we already talked about. The Federal Highway Administration, understanding our metropolitan planning organizations and regional planning commissions, and then a lot of other good stuff there to check out. Again, this is on activetrans.org/ITEP. So with that, I will hand it back over to Maggie.
Great, thanks, Jim. So now we want to start with just how projects are going to be evaluated and how they'll be scored. And we actually have more details to share with you this year than we have when we've done previous webinars. So for the project evaluation, so after IDOT receives all of the project applications, an initial review takes place, and IDOT makes sure that your project is first eligible for ITEP and that it directly relates to transportation. And you check out that first webinar and the ITEP guidelines if you have any questions about that. They also are looking to make sure your application is complete. It has all of the attachments, which we'll also be reviewing shortly. And they check that your cost estimate is accurate and reasonable. So after that, a larger statewide review team reviews all of the applications. So this team gives you an application score based on the merits of your project. And then a final list of projects recommended for ITEP funding is compiled, and these are given to the Secretary of Transportation for final approval, and then to the governor for award announcements, which is expected in the spring of 2025. So this statewide review team, they'll be giving you your application score, and it consists of at least 7 reviewers. So just something to keep in mind that it's not just IDOT looking at your application, it's many different individuals from different organizations with different perspectives. So it's IDOT, it's the Federal Highway Administration, it's MPO staff around the state, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and they are all independently reviewing your application. So there are 2 scores that you need to be aware of. There's the application score and there's the community score. So both are out of 100 points. The application score focuses solely on the merits of your project that are based on set criteria, which we'll review momentarily. And the community score is based on several factors, including poverty level and median household income. So once all applications are given that application score, the community score is used to determine the local match requirements. So the highest need communities will then either pay no local match or a reduced local match. So there's a sliding scale. And this only applies, the sliding scale local match only applies to walking, biking, and trail projects. All right, so now let's get into the application score and what is going to be considered. This score is, there are 10 criteria you should be aware of. They're each worth 10 points. So each, and that this, there are 10, again, 10 criteria. So this gives us a total of 100 points. And we'll go over each of these and kind of what to think about, what to highlight throughout your application. So to make sure you're addressing these different categories. So here are the first three. So sponsor capacity. For this category, you'll want to show that you have the resources to complete the project. In your financial resolution, which is a requirement of your application, that will, give you points here, but really let the reviewers know that you can handle an ITEP project, that you will get the job done. So, think about, do you have staff or other support who's going to be working on project implementation? And are you working with engineers who have done this type of project before? Do you have a history of completing projects in a timely manner? So think about if you've ever received an ITEP grant in the past, or a Safe Routes to School grant, or maybe another IDOT transportation related grant. Highlight that if you've successfully completed that project. Otherwise, you can also highlight local initiatives related to active transportation. So for example, do you have a local sidewalk program? So basically, is the sponsor invested in this? And one note is that if you have had some issues in the past with, say, you had an ITEP grant or Safe Routes to School grant or some transportation grant, and there were hiccups in the past, you can explain, how is that resolved, and how your job, you want to make sure to make the case that you can do this project if you're awarded funding. So B here is meets category intent and connectivity and linkage. So there are 9 ITEP categories outlined in the ITEP guidelines, and you'll need to choose the one most relevant category for your project, and the reviewers will be looking to see if your project meets the category intent. A question that has come up is, what's the difference between a bicycle pedestrian project and a streetscape project? So just a little more clarity on that. So a project that is solely focused on, say, your downtown area, maybe it's sidewalks surrounding a town hall, or it's a beautification project, which would include landscaping and decorative paving and lighting, benches. This would be a streetscape project. But if your project is something that it's going through a space, so it's going from destination to destination, so downtown to, say, a school to a park, that is a bicycle pedestrian project. So if you're still kind of torn, because I know sometimes it can be a little tricky figuring it out, check in with John and Yulita, and they can help you with the category selection. So also part of this criteria is, how does your project help improve the overall active transportation network? So really think about how does your project, or is your project connecting to existing facilities and to the regional active transportation network? Maybe it's a bus stop or a transit line, other sidewalks in the area, trails. So just thinking about the larger connections you're making and highlight that. And then C is accessibility and public benefits. So IDOT wants to know that your project is truly for transportation. So your project needs to be connecting people to destinations, and you're going to want to clearly explain this in your application. Destinations might include workplaces, businesses, schools, universities, healthcare, shopping centers, libraries, transit centers. So the more destinations you're connecting your project to, or you're helping people reach, the better. And highlight that again. Also, has ADA compliance been addressed through your project? Is it accessible to the public? And then who is benefiting from the project? So how many people are impacted? What's the regional impact? And really think about think about diversity, think about connecting disadvantaged areas to the larger community throughout your narrative, and like as you're maybe fine-tuning your project. All right, so the next three categories here, D is safety. So again, all categories are worth 10 points for the reviewers. Safety is like, is your project improving safety of people who are walking or biking? Is in your narrative, you'll want to explain first, what is the safety issue? And then how is your project addressing that issue? So for example, you could highlight there are crashes in your community, or there's speeding, or it's a very busy road, people are afraid to cross. And then your project, for example, might be an off-road path to then eliminate conflicts between vehicles and people walking and biking. So you can speak to your law enforcement, fire department, for example, to get data on this, but try to make a case for, what are the issues related to safety and how are you addressing those issues. And then E is project support and local commitment. So you should be able to show strong support from the community. Ideally, you have or will have hosted a public meeting about your project by the time you submit your application. And so summarize that public input. And if you have other information like survey data, getting letters of support can really go a long way in showing that local support. So essentially, you want to show that your project is vetted by the community, and IDOT knows that this project can move forward and the community is behind it. So another thing to be thinking about and to highlight is your project included in a local, state, or regional plan? If it is, make sure to include this information in your proposal. It helps show your commitment to the project. It shows that the public has been involved, but it does help, especially with the larger scale projects that might need to be completed in multiple segments over multiple funding years. If your project is not specifically mentioned in a plan, that is okay, but then think about, are there any local regional plans that state there is a goal to improve walking, biking in the community? So make sure to include as much information related to this as possible. F here is sponsor investment. So this kind of in some ways overlaps with one of the other criteria, the first criteria we talked about, but this is looking at the financial commitment of the sponsor. So that financial resolution will help showcase this, but some questions to be thinking about to make sure that you're getting across in your application is: one, can you provide matching funds? Two, does the sponsor have the resources to complete the project? And C, will the sponsor cover future maintenance of the project? And we know that not all projects will require a local match, and that will be taken into account. So, but all sponsors will have to cover future maintenance costs of the project. So that item in particular will help the reviewers rate this particular category. All right, so the final 4 review criteria to be thinking about. So G, past performance of the sponsor. This again is kind of overlapping with one of the other categories, but has the sponsor completed previous ITEP projects in a timely manner? So make sure to highlight that. If not ITEP, how about Safe Routes to School or another project administered through IDOT? So if a previous project went south or had some hiccups, explain what happened. You can explain, how things were resolved, or maybe you can explain that it was a long time ago and it's a new administration that's more committed. So just explain this. Otherwise, reviewers will be making assumptions. So just let the reviewers know what's happened. So project readiness, H, is IDOT prefers projects that are more likely to be completed. Um, this category in particular is really all about phase one engineering. So have you completed phase one engineering, or is it partially complete? You can get partial points if phase one is underway. If you have your PDR, so your project development report submitted and approved, you'll get full points for this section. This really shows when you have phase one underway or completed. This helps show the reviewers that known obstacles have been identified and they have been addressed, and your project can move forward, because IDOT is looking for IDOT wants to make sure your project's going to get done in the required timeline of 4 years. And then I is land acquisition status and railroad coordination. If your project doesn't require land acquisition or railroad coordination, you'll be awarded all 10 points for this category. But if you do need to acquire land, you'll want to document what has to be done so far. Land acquisition can take a significant amount of time, so it's important that you've started discussions with all landowners. You can, or it's a good idea to get letters of support from those landowners, explain the timeline of acquiring the land. And if railroad coordination is needed, has that started? Make sure to explain this, because especially with railroads, it can drastically affect the timeline of your project. So you just want to make sure you document how far along you are in the process. And then finally, J, the overall project rating. This score is subjective. It's the overall feel the reviewers are getting from your project and from your narrative, and if they think you'll get the job done. So it's just remember that there are at least 7 reviewers for every application, and they'll all be coming with various perspectives. So, your job is to make the best case you can for your project. It's why do you think your project is important? Why is it a good project? Make the case. So, all right. So all of that was the application score, those 10 categories. So now this is the community score. Your local match level is determined using IDOT's community mapping tool. And what you'll be drawing the location of your project on an interactive map within the application portal. And that screenshot on the right is kind of a look of what that looks like. And that your community score will be automatically calculated. The score it's on a sliding scale, and it's based on census tract data and includes all census tracts within a half-mile buffer of your project's location. The score is based on 4 factors listed here. So it's going to be looking at percent below poverty level, median household income, property tax rate, and your community size. The poverty level and median household income are given the most weight and are the most important factors in the final score calculation. And again, just wanted to mention that this sliding scale local match assistance is only for bicycle, pedestrian, and trail projects. So only for 2 categories within the grant. Here's an example of a community score calculation. So after you draw your project location on the map, a table will populate, and you'll see various scores by census tract. And for each of these columns, the highest score you got, so the highest score is 5 for each, the highest score will be selected for each category, and then it will be weighted by IDOT's determined weights for each category, and then a total score is calculated. So again, this is out of 100 points. 75 is actually a pretty high score, but just so you kind of have a sense of what things look like in 2022. Well, first, just wanted to mention, so you won't know if you qualify for a reduced local match until all awards are announced, because it depends on who else applies. And to give you an idea, of what happened during the last cycle in 2022. So if a project received a score, a community score of under 40, no local match assistance was given. And so the sponsor had to pay the full local match, which was typically 20%. Then projects that received a score between 40 and 55 paid half of the local match. So that's typically 10%. And projects that received a score of 56 or higher received the full local match assistance and paid no local match. So it's 100% funded. So that just gives you an idea of what happened last time. Again, this year we'll probably see a different range, but might give you kind of some ballpark figures. All right, so now we're going to walk you through the application, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jim to go over this part.
All right, so good to see questions coming in already. Keep them coming. Thank you, Maggie. Now that we've kind of talked about how the application will be evaluated, we wanted to, especially if this is your first time applying for a program like this, kind of walk through step by step what to expect for putting the application together and give you a checklist to do. So we can go to the next slide. Thanks. The very first thing you need to do, as Maggie was just talking about, is calculating your community score. And so to map that, you need to log in or create a new account on the ITEP online application portal. And I think, yeah, next one. Great, thanks. And so the first thing that we have to do is to create the community score before starting that application. So once you create your login on the ITEP portal, you'll go in and click on the My Community Score. This will help auto-populate various parts of your application, such as your legislative district. And throughout the application portal, if you have questions, you can click on the question mark for help on each of the sections of the application. So that's your little friend there if you get stuck or lost. Okay, so now we're going to walk through each of the 9 different sections of the application. So starting with general information all the way through finalizing and submitting. So first, you'll be filling out general information, which will include details about the project location, sponsor, the project name. You'll also need your unique entity ID from sam.gov, so have that handy. And then next, you'll need to provide the contact information for both the applicant and the sponsor. So the applicant is the main contact for the application, and the sponsors need to be an eligible entity with taxing authority. So that's something we talked about in the first webinar. If you are unsure of what that is, you can go back to that first webinar and learn more about that. And then in the third section, you need to check off one relevant category for your project. So check the one that is most relevant from that list. I know it can be hard to decide sometimes, but again, that's where you can lean on us and the IDOT folks to help you, decide what the best path forward is for you. Great. So moving on to project costs. You'll need to submit both a summary cost table, which is part of the application, and a detailed cost estimate as a separate attachment. So those are the 2 pieces of the project costs that you need to be thinking about. And putting together an accurate cost estimate is very important. So you should use an engineer or engineering firm, and they can ensure the work is feasible and meets IDOT and FHWA criteria. So if you need help finding a firm to work with, that's another thing that we can provide assistance with. But it's important to get a professional engineer or firm to put that cost estimate together, because if there are significant errors in your cost estimates, IDOT may decide that your application is not eligible to even be evaluated. Go to the next. So a little bit more about the summary cost table within the application. So you'll enter the total costs as well as the ineligible project expenses. So even if things aren't being funded, you need to include the full project cost. So those ineligible costs can be entered in that local only column, the second column from the right. And the project sponsor is responsible for 100% of any ineligible costs. And this chart is set up automatically to calculate the ITEP funds requested and the required match columns. For the time being, it's all set at 20% for most rows. So again, don't be alarmed. The local match assistances will be determined later. You can go to the next slide. So also in this section, you'll be asked if you will move forward with the project if you don't qualify for full local match assistance. So they want to know, are you prepared to complete the project if you receive only 50% or no state match? You'll also be asked to provide details if you are applying for any other funding. And you can see the ITEP guidelines for detailed instructions there. Finally, the detailed cost estimate, and so this is in addition to the summary cost table that's within the application. This is a detailed cost estimate that you need to include as an attachment. So it needs to include things like unit quantity, unit costs, the federal share, sponsor share, ineligible costs, total costs. Costs should not be displayed separately for each planned phase or location, and no lump sums. Contingencies and inflation are not allowable as a separate line item. And you can see IDOT's BDE 213 form for a cost estimate template. So you don't have to start from scratch. So section 5 of the application is the project description. And there are 8 sections to fill out under the project description, which we're calling your project narrative. In the first box, you'll be asked to provide a complete, concise description of your project. Please note that each field in this section has character limits, so pay attention to those. For example, this first question allows a maximum of 500 characters, so pay attention to those character limits. In the next box, you need to describe how your project relates to surface transportation. So again, getting back to the the core goal of the transportation enhancement program. So being able to articulate, what is the transportation need or purpose that will be addressed? How does the project relate to the overall transportation network? What is the project's proximity to other transportation facilities? So does it connect to transit stops or stations, trail access points or parts of the bikeway network? And what is the project's relationship to other key destinations? Also included in the project description, you'll need to think about the project location. So if the project lies within or passes through more than one community or county, just be sure to list them all. If the project is in a rural area, list the county and a reference point to the nearest town, county highway, or township road, or any other recognizable landmark. So for example, Clinton County near the southern edge of Lake Carlisle. Project limits. So list all the various limits of the project. So for example, Illinois Route 137, Sheridan Road from 7th Street to 12th Street. Making sure it also matches that description that you use to draw your community score map earlier in the process. The project length and distance. So a bike, sidewalk, or trail project would typically be measured in miles. So provide the length to a nearest 1/10 of a mile. And a streetscape project would likely be measured by the number of blocks it encompasses, but could also be expressed in feet or miles. For a spot improvement, you can enter not applicable or spot improvement. And finally, scope of work is also included in the project description here. So you need to provide a detailed description of your project and break down all of the elements. So will your bike trail be asphalt, concrete, or limestone? Will it be a multi-use path, bike trail, or marked bike route? Is it on-road or off-road or both? Is it a sidewalk? Provide widths and lengths as appropriate. What intersection improvements, landscaping, or other treatments will be included. Also, be sure to note if your project is part of a larger project or vision, and how it kind of ties into those bigger things. Go on to the next slide. So keeping with the project description, excuse me, the anticipated benefits. So here's where we're thinking of listing the anticipated economic, social, or environmental benefits, and thinking about will provide better access to business, jobs, healthcare, or a transit center. Will it help raise awareness and promote tourism within the community or the region? And who are the intended users of the facility, and what is the anticipated use? So who's going to benefit? How can you tell a story about the impact of the project? And safety improvements is another piece of this to also be thinking about. If the project addresses a safety issue, explain the existing problem and describe the mitigating effects of your proposed project. How is what you're proposing going to actually impact the safety issue that you're describing? Something I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, just check out the vulnerable road users dashboard for resources on safety, helping to just flesh out that safety narrative. There's you can do survey data, Strava, or other data showing usage or safety issues. So be creative there. Section 6 is the project status. So in this section, there are a few check boxes and yes or no questions that you have to answer. So is your project a standalone project or part of a larger project? Have previous ITEP funds been committed to the project? What is the predicted usage of the facility? As best you can, state who will be the users of the facility and expected traffic counts. Finally, thinking again about land acquisition and easements. If additional land is needed, mark the appropriate box in that part of the application. If right-of-way or temporary easements are required, you need to provide additional information on ownership and the number of parcels. Mention if discussions have started with landowners, make this clear. So get letters of support like we talked about before. Here's where you can be documenting that stuff in the application itself. Go to the next slide. Okay, project readiness. So under this section, again, mark all the appropriate boxes. Are phase 1 and 2 engineering complete or underway? Has the PDR report been submitted and approved? Have you started coordinating with the railroad, if applicable? So all that stuff that we were talking about before, this is where this is going to go. And your answers here will help IDOT estimate your project's duration. And project implementation timelines are discussed in the ITEP guidelines. And in the first webinar, so go back to activetrans.org/ITEP to check out that discussion there if you have specific questions about that. There's also a field where you can provide additional commentary about your project's readiness in there too. So if there's other, tales to tell, you can include that. And again, public involvement. Here's where we can talk about any of the work that's gone into engaging public. Has the public meeting been held? IDOT definitely recommends having a project-specific public informational meeting to gather input on the project before you submit your application. So attaching a summary about the meeting and the public's input is a good thing to include here. Letters of support from private citizens, business owners, special interest groups, public or elected officials, or outside agencies that might need to be involved in the project also help flesh out the project status piece. Go to the next. So section 7 is the maintenance plan. IDOT requires a maintenance agreement. Do you have a maintenance plan for the project? Do you have the proper maintenance equipment? Who will perform that maintenance? How is it planned and funded? There are a few checkboxes and fields to fill out about maintenance. So just be prepared to answer those things. All right, we're getting close to the end here. So section 8, attachments. Applicants need to upload all the required attachments. So optional or supplemental documents that support your application should also be uploaded here. This is a list of the 7 required attachments. This is for the GATA exempt grantees, and this can be found within the application and in the ITEP guidelines. So you can see those required. And then here's a list for the non-exempt grantees. And you can see a couple of additional pieces of documentation will be required. Again, this is all available within the application and the ITEP guidelines. Important note, each application is limited to 35 megabytes of storage space. So if that limit is exceeded, you will receive an error message and you'll need to reduce the total size of your attachments before you can submit your application. So just be mindful of that. The system will be tracking how much space has been used, and that'll be displayed at the bottom of the page while you're uploading those attachments. So just think about, reducing the size of your files if you can by, changing the resolution of any images or graphics, things like that. But that 35 megabytes is what you got to work with. Okay, the GATA and UEI requirements, GATA exempt grantees, so local public agencies, you must be registered through SAM.gov and have an active UEI, and non-exempt grantees, so universities or colleges, nonprofit state agencies, you must also be registered through SAM.gov and have an active UEI, and you must be registered in the GATA portal. So finally, after this long journey, we have arrived to the most exciting part, submitting your application. So you have to submit your application through the ITEP application portal. Clicking on the finalize and submit application button will submit your application. So once the application is submitted, the application will be locked for any further edits. It's your final answer. Forever hold your peace. A confirmation email will be sent to the user's email address, verifying that your application has been received. And if you haven't received the confirmation email within a 24-hour period, please email dot.itep@illinois.gov with your specific project information, such as the ITEP number, project title, and date you submitted your application, just to check in with those folks. And again, the submission deadline is September 30th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. Right now we can move over to questions.
Right. Oops. All right, I can get started. I'm pulling up the Q&A box. Start from the top here. So what is a PPS number and where do I find it? John or Yulita?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The PPS number is a programming number that is internal to our agency. You shouldn't need to have a PPS number, and you wouldn't have a PPS number for a new project because it would not necessarily be programmed yet. If you think you should have a PPS number, shoot us an email and we'll figure out why you think that.
All right. Thanks, John.
Great. Next question is about conflict of interests and the 2831 form. Is there a preferred village representative who should be filling that out, like village manager, finance director?
It could be those two people. It could be the mayor. It could be the village administrator. All of those types of folks. Or any of those types of folks, rather.
All right. Next question is about the estimating usage of a project. So for a bike pedestrian project, for example, adding a path where one doesn't exist right now, how do you estimate potential future users? Any guidance?
Well, obviously you have an idea why you need a bike and pedestrian path. So, um, I don't know how you would estimate the exact number. I mean, if you have a neighborhood or for instance, a subdivision of approximately 200 homes, um, you know, I don't know how many people do you think are going to use the path? It's whatever your reasoning is for building the path, I guess, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe looking at like if your project is connecting to other facilities like a
Mhm.
trail or a transit stop, like maybe looking at some usage numbers of those facilities as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there, I feel like there's probably a number of ways to do this, and it's tricky. It's
Yeah, yeah. What I would do is just, kind of step back and say, okay, why do we need this project? Why are we building this project? Why do we think this project is good for the community? Who's going to use it? Is it going to be, I mean, is it between a nursing home and a Dollar General? You know, how, what kind of usage is that going to get? What neighborhoods are being connected to other facilities, that kind of thing. Um, and you may also, if you've had a public meeting or if you've sent out surveys or anything like that, you can use those types of things then to also estimate.
great.
So this next one, I think, gets at some of what we were talking about in terms of, choosing the most relevant project category, and also, thinking about whether or not your project is part of a larger project. So this person's asking, would a project be penalized in score if there are a mix of project types, i.e. streetscape and a bike path / sidewalk? For example, a client wants to connect a residential area to downtown with a shared use path, and as well improve the connected downtown blocks with streetscape improvements, buried electric, new sidewalk, road diet, etc. So I guess this is a little bit about how you kind of slice that project.
Yeah,
And
yeah. You certainly would not be penalized for having a mix of different project types or items. What I would say is be careful which category you place that project under. Make sure that it makes sense. And sometimes that's hard to do. One way to look at it is how much money are we spending on a bike ped path versus how much money we are asking for the streetscape part. And you go with the what you're using the most money for. Um, it's In some ways it doesn't matter, but in other ways it does, because when you consider that we have $140 million to give away this time, 100 million of that is state funding. The state funding can only be used for bike ped and the conversion of abandoned railroad projects. Cannot be used for streetscape. So that could make a difference in what category you place it under. But the probably the best advice is, what is the larger portion of the project? Is it more bike ped or is it more streetscape? And just go with that.
Great. Thanks, John. All right, I'll take these next two questions. So first one is, how do you prove that phase one engineering is underway or completed?
Tell us. just tell us, if you've already submitted the PDR or the PDR has been approved. Shoot us a date of when it was submitted or approved. Otherwise, just in the narrative, you can say, we've begun PE1 and tell us how far you've gotten with it.
Okay.
If you have some type of documentation, you can include it. But yeah, just we assume for the most part, you're going to tell us the truth.
Yeah. All right, great. And then the next question here is item G. So I think this is in the scoring criteria, which is the past performance of sponsors. And they're saying it causes a disadvantage for new applicants. So John, any thoughts about that? So that was where I was just saying, if you applied for a previous ITEP project or Safe Routes to School project or another transportation related IDOT project, to share, you know, how that went. But any thoughts about just how, if maybe a community that hasn't done anything like that, how can they showcase?
That's fine. And that's not necessarily a disadvantage. When we review these, there are some, well, let's start out by saying we have a very diverse pool of reviewers. We have engineers, we have people like me, I'm not an engineer. We have people from outside the agency. We have people from different bureaus and departments within the agency. And so we're all coming at it, looking at different things based on our experience. And we're also aware that some things we just might not know. For instance, when it comes to looking at the detailed cost estimates, I personally do not know how much it costs to build a sidewalk, because that's not an area of expertise for me. So when it comes to things that we just don't know, we will pick the neutral ground. If there's a category, I just don't know the answer to this, I will score it as a 5. And that's kind of what we guide our reviewers to do, direct them to do. If you don't know, score it a 5. It's a neutral. So if you haven't done an application before, that it's really not a disadvantage. Some of us may know whether you have or not. Other reviewers might not know, and they're just going to score it a neutral.
Great. There are a couple of questions. I'm going to kind of jump ahead here a little bit, Maggie, about the project development report. So just for clarification, for IDOT's purposes, what is considered a PDR and who does the PDR get submitted to?
That is something that is submitted to and approved by our local roads, Bureau of Local Roads at the district level. And that the PDR is basically the end of PE1, of preliminary engineering 1, which means you have a good cost estimate. You have had all of your environmental studies done. You've gone through all the hoops. You're ready to get the project approved at the level where you can start drawing plans and writing up specs. So the PDR is the end of PE1, of preliminary engineering 1. And that is a huge step. PE1 takes a long time. If you've gotten to the PDR point, then you're in good shape to move forward.
All right, thanks. Now a question about a road diet project. So there's a project that will involve both restriping and resurfacing. Do they include all the costs, including ineligible resurfacing costs, or just the costs for which they'll be asking assistance?
Include all the costs for the entire project, because if it's ineligible, it should go into the local only column on the the little funding table in the application. So yeah, anything that you're not asking funds for goes into local only column. And one other thing on the funding table, the maximum award is $3 million. And the funding table will not work if you try to add in more.
Great. This is changing gears a little bit to a file type question. Can your application portal accept .zip files?
I believe it will.
All right.
Right. Question about where to put some information. So where would you recommend applicants include information about their past performance and their sponsor capacity?
I would. It could actually go anywhere. I mean, it could go in the project description box, which is the first box. It could go at the end of the project scope. After you've described exactly what the project is and everything in the project scope, you could say, we have received and successfully completed ITEP projects in the past, such as this, that kind of thing. And if it's mentioned, then those of us who have the ability will absolutely, oh, okay. The city of Springfield had a project. When was that project? And we can look it up and take a look. So anywhere really.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so here's another cost estimate. How shall we estimate quantity for pay items such as mobilization or traffic control, which are typically a lump sum pay item?
Quantity can be one. That type of lump sum is fine. What we don't want to see lump sums for is, preliminary engineering, X number of dollars, construction, X number of dollars. That is not a detailed cost estimate. We need more than that. But yeah, some of those things, Lee, would be fine as a lump sum.
All right, and another question about traffic count. So how shall we gather a traffic count for the sidewalk area? Is this referring to the street counts on getting around Illinois?
I would talk to the district office and see what they have.
Okay, if a shared use path along your project corridor is deemed to require proposed right-of-way during phase 2, can that additional right-of-way take be included in the ITEP funding request?
I think the answer is yes. I'm not exactly sure what that question means, but I think so. Yeah, I think the answer is yes, if I'm reading the question properly.
Oh, there's an interesting question about maintenance. So can an applicant obtain funding to purchase equipment such as electric blowers or sweepers that would be used to provide maintenance on the proposed project, or is that not something that they can be adding to the proposal? As a municipality, they often look to purchase more eco-friendly and sustainable equipment and would be interested in introducing this for the proposal.
That would not be an eligible funding item.
So maintenance equipment is not eligible.
No.
if phase one is completed, do you put the cost of it in the cost estimate and summary table? Is that something that gets reflected in the project costs?
You can put that in the summary table, fine, and just put it under local only. But make sure on the project readiness page that you fully indicate that this has been paid for with local funds and was completed, in the spring of 2022 or whatever.
Right. Next question is, can aesthetic features such as aesthetic base fixtures to signal poles be included in the funding request table? And there's a note, the signal pole itself is understood not to qualify. This would only be requested for the fixtures meant for beautification by the local agency.
I would say that's a stretch. So I would have to lean to no on that.
Would it like, I don't
mean,
know, I guess what exactly does that mean? Like, what if it's some landscaping around?
I mean, if it's a streetscape project,
Mhm.
which is what I'm guessing this is, I mean, this is kind of an odd one. An aesthetic base fixture to existing poles. I would still say that's a stretch.
Okay.
You can, here's one of the things when it comes to some things like that. After the awards are announced, for anyone who is awarded funding, the first thing we ask you to do is to have a kickoff meeting with the district. It would possibly and also include FHWA. And there may be things in your cost estimate as we go through that, you're assuming this is ITEP eligible, this is ITEP eligible. We may come across a couple of things that really aren't. So this is one of those things. It's kind of maybe not. So just kind of be prepared that that may end up being a no, and then that would have to be covered with local funds.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, zooming out of the trees, more of a forest question here. What do you all see as the most common issue you come across reviewing ITEP applications? And any tips you have to mitigate or avoid those?
Issues. Not enough public support. A couple of times, Jim and Maggie mentioned public meetings, and it's a good idea. I would just say it is a very, very, very good idea to have public meetings, and make sure that those public meetings are including, and the support letters especially, include the people that are actually going to use the facility that you're going to build. We definitely, we totally understand and believe that letters from your legislators, from your Congress people and that kind of thing, that is important because they should know what you're doing in your communities. But from our standpoint, if I see a pile of support letters from residents, from parents, from small businessmen in the area, those mean much more to us because those are the people that are going to be directly impacted. So public support is real big. Make sure you involve your communities. We had, just as an example, we had a project from the last cycle or 2 cycles ago that was awarded, and they had a public meeting. There were a couple support letters. When it came right down to it, once things started, all of these people came out of the woodwork and said, we don't want this here. This is not we think we should do this and this. And the local agency finally came back to us and said, we can't in good conscience go forward with this project because we're getting a lot of opposition right now. We need to spend some time with these people, talk through this with these people, and possibly reapply in the next cycle. So, it's real important. Good descriptions. Let us know exactly what you're doing. Be brief and be concise, but let us know exactly what you're doing. We get a lot of project descriptions and work scopes that they aren't complete enough for us to make sense of what's really going on. We get a few of those. You've got to make your case. You got to tell us, why is this good for our community? Who's going to use it? Who's going to be impacted? And how is this going to create a better community?
All right. Thanks, John. We've got another cost question. Can construction engineering be shown as a percentage of construction cost? Is that detailed enough?
Yeah, but if you know the percentage and you know what the construction cost is, then you know what the number is. Or am I not reading that correctly?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you do know the percentage, you should know the number. I guess is just one number okay for construction costs or construction engineering?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then I guess a similar question is, how do you break up phase 1 and phase 2 engineering so that it's not a lump sum?
Those normally are, and they can be shown as lump sum. It's the construction part that messes people up. If we have actually had applications where we get preliminary engineering $80,000, construction 1.3 million, construction engineering $100,000. That's not detailed. And especially with the construction, we need to see the breakout, because when you come to that kickoff meeting that you'll have after you're awarded, we need to be able to make sure that all the construction items are actually eligible. And, when we're reviewing, we need to see those individual items so that we can judge the accuracy of your actual cost estimate. If we don't know what's in construction, then we can't really judge whether the project that you're envisioning is really costing that much money. So the preliminary engineering and the construction engineering, we have an idea of what that percentage should be of the construction costs. So, those are kind of easy, but when it comes to the actual construction, we need to see the individual items.
All right, just a couple more. Thank you everyone for sharing your questions. This has been really productive. Would a project be worthy of an ITEP application if we already have a feasibility study underway and a local city's resolution of sponsors support?
Sure. Of course. You don't have to have PE done in order to get an ITEP award. If you do, it's better because you're going to get some more points. But I mean, we have seen and we've awarded some really awesome projects that have not been able to start PE yet. So.
And we talked about this in some of the other webinars, but ideally, if you need P1 funding for P1, apply for a combination of phase 1 engineering, phase 2 engineering, and that construction engineering, bundle it together for, I guess, John, unless it's a really, really big project, right?
To do what? I'm sorry.
So unless if it's a really, really big project, then you might just apply for phase one engineering, but otherwise it's good to bundle.
Yeah. We definitely want to see complete projects. But yeah, like Maggie said, if it's a real big project and you know that it's going to take a lot of time, because the other thing you have to keep in mind is that with all of these projects, we expect to have all of the ITEP funding obligated within 4 years of the award. So if you have a huge project that you know is going to take much longer than that, but you need some funding help with the PE portion, you can apply for just the PE portion.
All right. And the last question we have here, although I know Yulita was answering some questions in the chat, so I think it might be valuable to just read through those before we close out, just so people can hear about those questions as well. But question is, we do not have a downtown. Will a monument facing I-55 with landscape be considered streetscape?
I would say no. If it's just a standalone monument.
All right. Here, one more question just came in, so I'll read that. Is there a lower limit to the size of the project? I had one local community give back the funding based on PE1, 2 in construction engineering costs was too much to build the 500-foot of shared use path.
Give back the funding based on PE1. It was too much to build. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Not sure if I do either. I guess there's no necessarily lower limit on the size of the project, right?
No, there's not. But you know, if please don't ask us for $5,000 because you and we are both spending more time than that, just putting the application together and reviewing it. But no, there's not a set lower limit.
All right. All right, let me just look through some of these answered questions. Someone was asking about a resolution of financial commitment if there's draft language. And yes, there is a example that you can refer to. Check out the ITEP website. You need to put a link in the answered questions in the Q&A box. It's also on that activetrans.org/ITEP page. Let's see, someone was wondering, I haven't read this yet, is it allowable to build by segments when requesting funding for a single project? So for example, we have a 2-mile long project costing 100 million. Can we request funding for 3 million this year for the first segment and so on? And Yulita says projects can be built in phases or segments. However, each phase or segment is funded separately. So previous funded work will be ineligible for additional funding from ITEP.
Right, and you'll definitely want to check with your district. Talk to your district, because there are certain ways that section numbers are assigned also, and we cannot fund the same section number.
Another question that Yulita answered, can you expand the language on benches? What type of benches are considered permanent in nature as to assure they are eligible for ITEP funds? And the answer is they must be permanently installed, cannot be moved.
Yep. Bolt them down to the concrete.
All right. Someone was wondering, I know this has come up. Do you have suggestions for opening the Bob files, the 2831 and the 2835 PDF forms? Because they're just having trouble opening them. And Yulita said, please right click on the form and click on save link. So save it as a PDF on your desktop. If you use Edge, Yulita says, please email dot.itep and they can send you the instructions for opening IDOT forms.
Yep.
Just scrolling through, seeing if there's anything else. Oh, does a higher community score increase the likelihood of funding? And the answer is no. So that community score is only used for figuring out your local match assistance eligibility.
Right. Yeah, the community score has nothing to do with whether or not you are awarded a project. The awards are based on the review or application scores, and the community score is used strictly to determine whether or not you receive local match assistance.
And someone was looking for help with their community score. So again, just email dot.itep@illinois.gov and they will get you help. Someone was wondering about how to find that cost estimate template. Yulita added a link in the chat, and we also, I believe, added that link on our activetrans.org/ITEP site. And the form is the BDE 213. Let's see. Someone asked, does the funding resolution need to be passed prior to the submission of the application, or will we be able to provide the resolution and date we expect it to pass? Yulita says it is one of the required attachments and needs to be submitted with your application.
True. If there's a problem with that, let us know beforehand. But the resolutions, the wording that we've included for your resolutions should allow you to get it passed beforehand.
Question about so if a proposed project is part of a larger roadway project, should the cost estimate show the details for the roadway items as being ineligible costs?
Yes.
Okay.
And those would be included in the local only column.
Okay. All right. Can you have more than one user accessing the application in the system? Yes, but you'll just need to share those, your username and password for the ITEP account. Does the maximum 3 million award include both the typical 80% amount plus the community score if awarded? And yes, 3 million is the maximum, including local match assistance, if you're eligible. Does ITEP ever cover feasibility studies? And the answer is no, unfortunately, it does not. If more than one municipality would participate financially, are duplicate application forms needed or duplicate funding resolutions? Yulita says no. If more than one municipality partners financially, a lead agency will need to be chosen as the sponsor. Question about the sunset clause. When does funding need to be spent? Funds need to be obligated within 4 years after you receive your award notification letter. All right, I think, are there some there? I think there are more questions in the Q&A box. All right, so Jim, do you want to rotate again? I can start with this first one. Is there a lower, wait, did we answer that one? Oh, we answered that one.
Yeah, we did that one.
All right. Hold on, sorry. We have here. Will the proposed projects require BEP and apprenticeship allocations? I'm not sure if I know what that means, but
I believe not. Talk to your district.
Does obligation occur once the construction contract is awarded?
No, obligation occurs before a construction contract is awarded. And you can talk to your district about the timing of that.
will a frontage road removal proposal to remove asphalt frontage roads that do not allow water to penetrate into the soil easily? This will be replaced by topsoil and planted with deep-rooted grass roots. So I guess they're wondering if that's eligible.
Just to remove a road? No. I would think we would consider that landscaping as a standalone project. So yeah, no, that would not be eligible.
And then there's this one other question that I don't know if I understand.
Rough ballpark on typical cost for a PE1 report by an engineering firm. No, I mean, we wouldn't have that. I mean, that would be a quote that you would have to get from an engineering firm. I don't know.
All right, well, I think we made it through all the questions. So lots of good questions. Right. And no questions ended up in the chat, right? Just wanted to make sure we're good. All right, well, I think we can wrap up then. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, IDOT and IPHI. And our next webinar will be back here on Wednesday, September 11 at 11:30 for, we'll focus on Q&A with IDOT staff. So come with your questions and hopefully you're a lot further along in your application by that time. So, and in the meantime, feel free to reach out to dot.itep@illinois.gov if you have some questions about the application, and check those resources, the IDOT ITEP page, the guidelines, the activetrans.org/ITEP website for resources and for the recording of this webinar and the slides. And yeah, we wish you good luck getting your applications ready and hope to see you in September. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.